You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
The United States is on the brink of the largest wealth transfer in its history, as aging boomers and traditionalists pass along financial assets estimated in excess of $68 trillion to their progeny, further polarizing class and reinforcing unparalleled income inequality. This inheritance is expected to solidify millennials as the richest generation in human history, but perhaps for only a few among them. As economists identify possible outcomes and wonder at the future ahead, skeptics can't help but ask how much of an impact the transition can make if it is only from a handful of wealthy individuals to an even smaller one. And what of the world the youth inherits, one arguably on the brink of an unprecedented existential overhaul? How will millennials, Gen Z, and those to come thereafter respect the wisdom of past generations while learning from their mistakes? Now that they know better, can they do better? Will anything really change? Or will money continue to define and divine the course of America's future, at least for those who have it? I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this I Am Interchange podcast, myself and generationally diverse guests, Kyle Mack, Sarah Blessing, Shane Lieber, Pete Strom, and Susan Karstensen, examine wealth, climate, society, politics, and the ties that inextricably bind generations to each other. For the last 6 episodes, we have featured each of the participants in this OK Boomer debate. If you haven't already, I'd recommend listening to my one-on-one interviews with each of them to gain clearer context in their perspectives. We recorded this during the COVID-19 pandemic on October 17th, 2020, in our makeshift quarantine studio with filtration and an agreement to wear masks and social distance. This is one of my favorite topics that I Am Interchange has produced. Enjoy. In the midst of this global pandemic, how has it affected or limited your choices? Have you lost any choices that you wish you could have back?
I've lost the ability to see my daughter who's in Amsterdam. It's a huge impact for me.
You can't travel.
No.
Yeah.
And she can't travel.
And she can't come see you.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me. I'm half Canadian, so most of my family is up in Canada, and not being able to cross the border, I had to cancel some trips. Like that's some of that freedom has been kind of annoying to deal with, but
yeah, travel, missing out on family.
You still have a Canadian passport?
No, not right now. I could get one if I wanted to, but I don't have it right now.
I'd highly recommend it.
Yep.
Yeah, I've considered it.
If you can get it.
Yeah, I don't like the feeling of being around loved ones and feeling like I'm putting them at risk because I still go to work and things like that. That's been the biggest thing for me.
I think just the norms of connecting with friends and physical touch and hugs and handshakes, and everybody's already mentioned travel, but like that's the one that, be like, oh, it'd really be great to do. Oh, can't do that,
I do have a lot of concert tickets for next year.
Oh, there you go.
The music industry is interesting right now. I was out of a 10-year career of it, and people say that they're going to save their concert tickets for next year, but all of they're projecting that 90% of the local independent music venues are going to go out of business. And what that means for concert tours is all of the venues, their staff and production crews are all like moving on to find new jobs. And that'll be I hope that the concerts will still happen.
Do you think that market ever comes back?
Yeah. I think people crave human connection. I think there are a lot of events and people kept going to them because they have to keep going, but this is causing people to maybe pause, and for events to come back, they might come bahave in a more thoughtful way. And so I kind of buy into that.
I think it's gonna be a bit like the restaurant. I think people who have already made the investment may really lose their shirt, and a lot of people will take the financial hit, but when things come back, somebody else will step in because the market opportunity will be there. So it just may not be the person who was running it before. Maybe a bumper start because a lot of people with the expertise have moved on to other things, but it'll come back. It won't be for the people who probably had all the investment in it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is too bad. So maybe it'll reinvent itself in some way. Maybe. What kind of toys did you all have growing up?
I have a Teletubby, a purple Teletubby. I think his one is like Popo or
Oh.
something. The big purple one.
Popo the purple Teletubby.
Yes, I've had him since I was a baby, and he's still in my room.
Popo the Teletubby.
And I never changed his batteries. He still makes noises.
Shut the front door.
I'm serious. It's weird.
That's awesome.
I had a block of wood.
You had a block of wood?
That's fantastic.
My parents, they said that somebody gave me like a nice Tonka truck type of thing, and I was much happier just playing with the block of wood, pretending it was a truck. So
That's funny. You're exactly like the stereotype of a parent or a cat owner getting the great gift and then playing with the box.
I'm the fourth out of 5 kids. I'm having a hard time remembering particular toys. We kind of had whatever was there.
So 4 or 5 kids, you had maybe a lot of hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
Do you have any? What kind of toys were they?
I remember there was a wagon.
A wagon?
And we used to put on plays with a bunch of neighborhood kids and things like that.
It's hard to remember any specific toys. I guess I do remember a train set that I had, whereas like you build the train track and you just like have it go all around.
I had one of those.
Yeah, that's like the one thing that I really do remember outside of like the typical like Legos and things like that.
Yeah, cool. I was really into castle Legos.
Yeah, castles are fun.
The medieval battles.
Yeah,
the things that,
always like that fantasy.
things that
element to
boys
it.
like. I don't know. Do girls like? Women like castle Legos, don't they?
Legos are pretty, non-binary.
Who doesn't
Yeah, I mean,
like Legos?
but like genre wise.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't have any Legos. I had stuffed animals, but mostly I just had a house next to a creek with a lot of sticks and stuff. So I built a lot of forts.
Talking about the generations, what didn't you have growing up that exists today?
iPads.
Computers, period.
A lot of these kids are just like glued to tablets nowadays. I mean, like I had the computer, but I don't know. Something about iPads just weirds me out. Seeing like kids like glued to them for multiple hours on end.
So you didn't buy into that?
I was glued to a computer screen for multiple hours on end, but not an iPad. And I feel like I don't know. I'm kind of like making it up in my head that that's so much better, but it's not that much better.
Well, yeah, because like when I think about it, like I guess the equivalent for me would be I had a Game Boy when I was young. Like I got it when I was like 5 or 6 years old, probably. But I guess that'd be like the equivalent of an iPad today. Like the iPad just gives you more options. You were limited with the Game Boy, but it's kind of the same effect, really.
You were going to say something, Susan.
We didn't have anything like that. I would have been in my 20s in a professional job before the first time I used a computer. I had a lot of books, but
My first piece of technology, I think I was probably 15, and I just had like one of those iPods with the teeny screen that you scroll and scroll and scroll to find the
Nanos.
sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much.
I remember my first iPod.
But I was never tech savvy. There was some tech when I was young, but I didn't really partake all that much.
I think just knowledge around the impact, like we knew generally the impact of food on the body, but the degree to which we know now of nutrition and, sugar and, all those, we sort of generally thought, sugar's bad or fat, like just the level of specificity around nutrition and how we feel and how we function. That knowledge is hugely different.
Sure. Okay, so food knowledge, heard a little bit of kind of technology based. Yeah, it's interesting because the generations are now kind of defined as kids who have been on Earth as long as there have been like iPhones, and they haven't known it in any other way. Gen Z. According to Peter Francis, a demographic and consumer markets expert, baby boomers were the first named generation to exist. Those that came earlier, like the greatest generation that fought in World War II, were named retroactively after the case. It all started when the Census Bureau referred to the years between 1946 and 1964, during which birth rates rocketed up from around 3 million a year to over 4 million a year as the post-war baby boom. As the kids born in this boom started to grow into adults and thus consumers, ad agencies found traction by marketing their products to so-called baby boomers. What generation are you all?
Z.
Shane, you're Gen Z.
Yes.
So you were born between 1997 and 2009.
Yes.
Sarah?
I was born right 1996, so I'm not really claimed by either of them very well.
Mr. Kyle Mack.
Yeah, I'm also a millennial, but I'm on the tail end. I was born in 95.
Okay. Pete,
I'm 1970s. I think I'm an Xer.
you're an Xer.
Generation
Yeah,
X.
1965 to 1980. Susan, you're on the cusp also.
Yeah, I was born in 1962. So does that, I'm either an old or a young boomer?
You're a young boomer.
Young boomer.
Yeah. What's the first thought that goes through your mind when you hear "Okay, boomer"?
I instantly think of the first time that I heard it was, I think it was in the Australian Parliament, and there was a generation. I don't even know. Probably millennial, but and it was I think they were dealing with climate change or something, but they were kind of getting. She was kind of getting mansplained by this older person in the Parliament there, and her response was "Okay, boomer," and it like kind of went like wildfire around the internet. That's what I heard of it. I thought it was funny.
You saw this woman from the Australian Parliament get mansplained, and she said "Okay, boomer." So that was the first time you heard it. So your connection to it gave you what was, if you could put one word on it, what described it?
It was sort of like, it was a shorthand way to push back on being constantly told by the people that are in power how it is and how it's going to be, and somebody finally going, "Oh, okay, old man," like
Sure.
I've heard enough of your crap.
Yeah, I instantly think of the meme culture that spurred out of that. It's just kind of a comedic meme, for better or worse, to kind of dismiss people for being out of touch. Generally, older people. I think that's generally where the meme kind of spawned from. And, now people on the internet just call everybody boomers because of the meme. But like, I've been called a boomer before for not knowing something.
Got it. So
Yeah.
so it's transcended generations to just people who are deemed out of touch.
Yeah, now it's just like a internet culture thing that's kind of come out of it.
I definitely feel that resonance with that. Working in kind of a political field with what I do, there's definitely always that older boomer age, generally white men, but kind of transcends gender. That's like, we need you to be in the political field, but it's not your time yet, and you're not like smart enough to really have an opinion, and you need to leave it to us. And so that's I don't know. I resonate with the woman in the Australian Parliament who is going through that pretty hard.
I think it's funny. I love it. I associate it, like, personally, I put it more toward, like, someone has been saying something for a very long time, and I just don't want to hear it anymore. Like, that'll pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and this is the way it is, and that there's actually meritocracy or whatever. And I just kind of get tired of hearing that.
I can't remember when I first heard it. The closest thing to it was after the 2016 election, and we were out with my daughter and one of her friends, and one of my friends, and our two daughters were with us, and we're out in the street. And I remember we're right at the corner of like Wilson and Maine, and these two young women were just like, "We just think people over like 50 shouldn't be allowed to vote." You guys are the ones who are screwing everything up. And why can't there just be an age limit on voting? They were like, "It's not your future, it's our future."
That's so funny, because I've upped the age level of that, but I've had, not that I think it's really like obviously applicable, but, or like feasible in real life, but I've had that. It's like, you're so kind of old that it's not your future anymore. Like, we are going to design the way this world works now as an up and coming generation, all the ones that still have all this time left. And it's interesting to me to hear that I'm not the only one that's had that thought before.
Oh yeah, they were just adamant about it, and it actually made me think about it, because it's like, it is true. It's like, what are you voting for? Your property tax, whatever, or should it be the future for the next generations? And so anyway, it made a lot of sense to me.
As someone over that threshold, how did you feel about that coming from your daughter and her friends and just kind of laughing at it, like laughing at their mom not being able to vote anymore?
I think not necessarily, on purpose or deliberately, but it's like, I guess it would be like my generation, a little bit before, a little bit after. We've done so much to screw things up. And I think it's for lack of like thinking long-term implications about anything, whether kids should be on iPads grown up or, oh my God, plastic was so convenient, but it's like, did anybody ever think about it's like, where was it going to go? It was like everybody was just so sucked into the convenience. And so I'm great with people who will do some more long-term thinking about it.
Are you thinking though that, would you not vote?
At this stage, no.
You wouldn't vote. You would give up your vote.
No. At this stage, I would not give up my vote.
Okay.
I don't want you to give up your vote, Susan.
I will use my vote and my voice and my money to help drive change.
Okay. Shane, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no. This reminds me of a philosophy class I took when I was a freshman, and it's just stuck with me for like 3 years. And it's when things are created and technological advances happen, there is nobody, especially now and especially 40 years ago, who went, should that happen? So like with self-driving cars, like there's like a lot of morality questions that are coming up. Like, do you kill the old woman or do you kill the baby? And that's a hard one. But I think that's a problem with capitalism, is that nobody's going to ask the question. It's just, is it more profitable? Yeah. The whale is worth more dead than alive.
We'll get to capitalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do you all agree with not letting old people vote? Is that what we're coming to?
No, I disagree.
You disagree?
Well, I think we're conflating the idea of age. Like generally what we see is as people get older, they actually move towards more generativity. And in a normal developmental process, they would become more selfless and think about future generations. That's traditionally. Now, we have all these examples in our culture, in politics and so on, and the people who have been in power a very long time fit that age category. But I think it's a mistake to assume because they're old is the reason that they're supporting unfettered capitalism or the structures that cause problems. Because I'd also say it's also that same generation that generated the environmental movement, that has done more for civil rights and other things that we really would say are massive improvements in our lives, also came from that same generation. So to conflate it with age, to me, isn't really a helpful construct.
Yeah, and I'd second that. And also, it's like there's also something to be said for gaining some wisdom for the people that came before you. There's a lot more life experience to be learned from them. It's like, they might be a little bit out of touch with like current technological advancements that are going on right now, but just like in general, they've been through a lot of things in their life that we can gain value from, and they might have something to say. And it's also like they care about what's coming for the future generations. Like I would expect that parents care about what's going to happen for their kids in the future, even when they're long gone. So like not saying that they shouldn't have a right to have a say in that. I don't agree with that.
I also don't totally agree with that. It's definitely a thought that I've had, but obviously there's also things that can be voted upon that do affect the elderly, like Social Security, things like that they should have a say in, I think. But I do think that it's an interesting concept, and it can also be kind of turned and say, like, make the voting age younger would also be like an appropriate reaction to that. But it is an interesting concept that was worth exploring.
Can we talk about the other generations and maybe some stereotypes around them? We can't just bag on boomers. What's something about Gen X, something about Pete's generation that is just kind of stereotypically prodding at it?
I feel like Gen X is one of those generations that people just kind of forget about. Sorry. But I think generally the stereotypes is the younger the generation is, the lazier they are, and the older the generation is, the more out of touch they are. I think that's generally how the stereotypes go.
Yeah. No, that's better generalization. In my work career, I would say the one that I would notice is, you get somebody in there who's in the job for 6 months or a year, and they're like, "Where's my promotion?" And I'll be like, you actually do have to work for this. And it wasn't that they were lazy; they were just impatient.
So Gen X wasn't lazy, but they were impatient.
Mm-hmm.
And then what did you say before you made the statement between the ages? You kind of forgot about them?
Yeah, I always kind of just think like millennial and then forget about Gen X, and then it goes to the boomers. But yeah, the Gen X is just kind of there, and I think generally people forget about Gen X.
There's a lot of discourse about millennials, Gen Z, and boomers, but not a ton of discourse about Gen X. Like, I feel like out there. So I would agree with that. And I think that's why I get them confused, because I've never really talked about Gen X before.
They're like a forgotten generation. Sorry,
you just gotta watch Stranger Things. Watch Stranger Things and look at the era that we grew up in. Look at the horrible clothes that we chose to wear.
Was that through the 80s?
It was the 80s. Yeah,
I think there's something.
There's something. Well, yeah, they're like stylistically. There's something about growing up in the 80s too, where we're highly under the influence of the boomer generation, which is considered the me generation. And so the Xers got this sort of, second tier, like it's about taking, it's about getting rich, getting ahead. People were warning about environmental problems. Our biggest concern was the morning after, which was was the concern around nuclear war. So like when we were kids, it was like, that was the big fear, nuclear war with Russia, and that was kind of the mind frame of the world. And it was also very binary. United States and Russia, those are the two superpowers. And so I think that impacts a lot of the thinking of our generation, and even the ethics of the generation, of like starting to grapple with the ideas of unfettered capitalism and the upsides, and then also all the downsides, and struggling with those two things.
So growing up in the Cold War era, at the height of Russia and the United States, did it kind of overshadow and silence that generation with fear?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't experience a lot of fear. There was some around that particular issue. I don't think we experienced anywhere near the level of existential threat that we think about now, from climate change, from, loss of meaning-making structures, from, all the things that like my kids are looking at. I think they just feel so much more general anxiety than I did, or my generation did at that time.
How about millennials? What are some stereotypes about millennials? You two, me.
They're lazy.
Yeah.
Millennials are lazy.
They're lazy, and they don't want to do anything, and they don't want to consume.
And short attention spans is always another one that's thrown out too, which is weird because we're the ones that are like listening to 3-hour podcasts generally.
You guys are the market for that.
Yeah, exactly.
You said they don't want to consume?
They want to consume less.
They don't have the money to consume.
That too.
Yeah, so is it out of financial necessity they don't consume, or out of like a social responsibility?
I think there's a debt issue. Like millennials are very much in debt typically, and that's, college tuition and all that stuff. So there's probably that element to it. But also it's just like there's an element of, technologically speaking, we don't need a whole lot because we have everything that we need on our like iPhones and our laptops. There's not a whole lot that we actually need. I think there's kind of like a minimalism element that comes with millennial culture.
I feel like millennials were also in the era of like reduce, reuse, recycle is the virtuous thing to do. And I guess it depends on kind of where your leanings are. But I also see that as being like, I'm a good person if I reduce, reuse, and recycle kind of thing.
Is that enough?
No.
That's not enough.
Well, I mean, it's another conversation, but getting into like the personal, the individual's responsibility for the way the world is versus corporations and capitalism again, in my opinion, and how we've designed society to not function in certain ways on purpose.
Yeah, it's the difference between personal behavior and systems. It's like reduce, reuse, recycle. That's just basic personal hygiene, but it's not going to move the needle on what we actually need to do systemically to have any impact on climate change in the timeframes that we need to make.
So it's like a nice start, but
Well, it's like a nice thing you can do for sure. But it's been crafted that way to put the blame on the individual for consuming instead of the corporation for making the thing that we consume and then taking no responsibility for dealing with the waste it produces.
Hear, hear.
But isn't there also an element of like you're the one buying the things and consuming the item? Isn't that also an element towards it? Is it all on the corporation to blame?
We don't have enough economic power to demand better. I think that's a big problem with the people right now. And also, rarely, it's happened before, but rarely have we gotten together and boycotted a product. Like if we all just went, you know what, screw Walmart, that would never happen.
People need the low prices
Yeah,
to survive.
Yeah, there's a whole class of
They're
people
putting
who
food
needs
on
that,
people's tables.
even though they
Like,
suck.
is that their problem? Or is that like a problem that they're putting food on people's tables for low prices though?
No, it's not a problem, but
Like it's solving starvation.
right, but there's better ways to go about it.
There's
Like
so
what,
many
though?
other ways. I mean, it's again
Socialism.
Well, what I hear generationally though is underneath all of that is there's a sense of powerlessness on the part of the individual that seems to be strong in what you're both saying. And you're also pointing out that part of the narrative of putting it on the individual is kind of the deceptive undertone that makes it feel like, oh yeah, it's our individual. It's all we can do is our individual thing instead of actually looking at the systems
right,
and the power
which
structures.
is what they want.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have a 25 and a 26-year-old, and I would say they are very minimalist, and they don't consume, and they try hard not to. They're fiercely independent, and therefore it's like I've never stereotyped them, that generation, kind of as lazy, because all the ones I see are working really hard. Although it's just like 52% of people under 25 are still living at home. And so is that mode under-resourced and underpowered and everything? Absolutely. I mean, they're in a world of hurt right now between the college debt and the lack of wage growth, lack of opportunities.
Yeah. I definitely think the laziness stereotype is misrepresented in a lot of ways because and you'll get to that stat that I think you've shared with all of us about who has the money and at what point. But millennials, like it's such a different time for you can't just work your way up the ladder the way you used to be able to. Like it's really hard, and a lot of people have to have multiple jobs and still can't have that luck, honestly, that you need to climb the ladder sufficiently. And
Okay, well, that's a good segue into where we're going to go next. When baby boomers were the same age as millennials, they held 21% of the nation's wealth. And at the same age, millennials hold a mere 3% of the wealth. In the United States, an estimated $68 trillion will be transferred over the next 30 years from the silent generation and the baby boomers to Gen X and the millennial generations, and Gen Z as well. The millennial generation will become the wealthiest generation ever. In what ways will this wealth be transferred?
Could I just challenge? I wonder in that first stat that the boomers at the same age held that much wealth was more a function of income disparity wasn't as extreme. And so there weren't the big highs and lows. And so, because I guess I think of like myself at a baby boomer's age, when I was there, I didn't see any wealth or see it among that group, at least the people I was around. I just think proportionately, the boomers did make their way up and accumulated so much, and the disparity is so great right now. I don't know that I know the raw amount is less, but I don't know that it's that much less.
Okay, so at that age, as a boomer, you didn't feel the 21% of the wealth as it's being described?
No.
It can be a deceptive statistic because right now, like the gap between those who are actually like merely wealthy and super wealthy is so huge. It all depends on how you stratify and measure these things. So the 1% or the 0.1%, the difference between there is so much wider than the difference between the 99 and everything below. It's completely different universes. So you almost have to throw it out to look at these numbers.
That's why I also, with like your question within that statement, I'm wanting to know how many people is that money actually, the vast majority of that money actually transferring down to? Because when the second Koch brother dies and their $45 billion go down to their 5 kids, like that's not really spreading out the wealth all that much. Like, yes, it's 5 instead of 2.
I think the statistic is supposed to get worse.
Yeah,
How's
that
that?
the disparity gets worse.
Yeah.
I think of trickle down economics and how well that worked out. And it's a little scary. There's a bunch of fields. I've lived in Bozeman all my life. I've seen how this place grows. It's weird. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense to me. These farms and fields that are sitting around here are worth millions of dollars that the boomers bought for like nothing. And now they're worth millions of dollars. And they got their own little farms on there, but those are just going to go to their kids. It's not going to get evenly distributed or anything. It's not going to go to the people who actually need it. It's going to go to those already wealthy kids.
Well, and also, how are we defining wealth, though? Like, are we just defining wealth purely in terms of currency? And because there's so many other factors to go into on how we've innovated, how technology has advanced throughout society over the years. It's like, I'm way better off than my mom was, who would be a young boomer. I have an iPhone and access to the entire world. I can be completely connected to the entire world. She didn't have that. She was way better off than her parents. My grandparents barely had cars. I think there's like a little bit of a lack of perspective of where we are right now. Just in comparative what we're capable of doing. Like, it's not all just about the green dollar when it comes to wealth. Like, we have much more capabilities of actually doing things now.
I mean, I think to support your point, we're also experiencing this massive disparity in wealth, even among the wealthy. The bottom end, the number of people that have come out of poverty, as has been defined, is continuing to increase. And I think all these questions matter if you're talking about actual numbers of people versus percentages of populations, because we have so many more people. Sometimes it can be deceptive and we say, oh, the percentage is much better, but we could actually have more people technically in poverty because there's more people. But to your point, the bottom has been brought up along with it.
Yeah.
But along with it, we see this crazy disparity at the top that just doesn't, there's no way to really account for it in any type of, even if you buy into meritocracy, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it's just like 150 years ago, the average person was living on the equivalent of $1 a day. There's no comparison on where we are in terms of just general wealth across the world. I'm not as really interested in like the wealth disparity if everybody's getting wealthier, if you know what I mean. But I'm also probably the token capitalist of this group. So I understand I'm probably in a minority in this discussion.
I have become very wealthy on the back of capitalism.
I don't think you're the only one that feels that way. Let's riff off of that. So what does it mean to earn something?
I went to work and I earned money. And if I wanted more money, I worked more.
I would challenge that in that I do think there are people that work extremely hard, multiple jobs, that can't ascend the ladder because of multiple different reasons. And just to throw that in there, definitely it's possible, but it's not possible for everyone in this society.
I agree with that. I mean, I think my privilege was, white and education. And with that kind of background, yeah, I moved to Denver. I worked for one company for 6 years, went to work for another client for 4 years, moved back to Bozeman, worked for a company that was successful and we sold it and I made some money. Went to work for another company that was very successful and sold it and I made a bunch more. And it's not available to everybody. It's what's a shame though, because it wasn't like even going to college for me. My mom, like I said, there were 5 kids and there was never any money. And my mom had worked for a year and saved up $2,000 to send me to college. It's like $2,000 even in 1980 didn't go a long ways. And so I worked and I took out loans. It certainly was possible for me. But I agree, it's not available to everybody. Anyway, I think it's worth putting efforts into that side of it.
That side of it being capitalism?
That side of it making opportunities more equally available.
Well, Susan, I'm going to hype you up a little bit here. If you made and sold 3 or 4 companies, you're not some dude who just had a weird idea for a t-shirt or for a pair of pants or something like that. You are obviously good at something.
Yep.
You're very good at making companies. You have a purpose. The dude who's just sitting on his couch smoking pot and then goes, you know what? What if I make a website and then he gets filthy rich off that? I don't know if I like that guy. But you have a gift and you're using it to help make the world a better place.
I generally believe that businesses can be bad and get greedy and do bad things. But in general, I believe if a business is producing something that somebody wants to buy and it's employing people doing it, that's a worthwhile, it's not necessarily mission driven, but it's a worthwhile endeavor that rises a lot of boats.
If people want it, they will come. Because you're kind of talking about like Zuckerberg just kind of smoking pot and kind of coming up with a social network. People obviously saw value in it, so they went to the social network, and he's making a ton of money because of it. It's like people see value in it.
There's an argument for, exploitation in there. In that, like, are we just being exploited, or do we really want it? And now are we like hooked on it to a point where like we just don't have a choice? Are we heroin addicts?
You can disconnect from Facebook at any point in time.
You
can
could
disconnect from Twitter at any point in time.
But tell a heroin addict the same thing, man.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. We're drug manufacturers that are just like fueling our dopamine kicks right now.
Yeah.
But like, there's a certain amount of willpower that comes into overcoming that dopamine kick.
I'm not sure I agree with that, with the fact that there's willpower. I mean, and to some extent there is, but these social media networks have been created and manufactured and designed to keep people addicted to them so that they can make advertisers money. And in my world, capitalism kind of exists off of two basic fallacies, which is it doesn't work unless you exploit either workers or exploit the environment. And that's why it's not sustainable in the long term. It has made a great deal of money for a lot of people, and it has raised our poverty level, and that worked really well for quite a while. But it doesn't work anymore, in that we can't continue with capitalism unless we destroy our environment and keep exploiting people in this country and overseas. And I just don't see that as a viable option in my future.
Who would say, by a show of hands, would say that capitalism will solve the climate crisis? Will take part in solving the climate crisis?
Take part in it. Is it the entire answer?
It's kind of vague.
Yeah, it won't by itself.
We don't have time for the mechanisms of capitalism, and we don't live in pure capitalism. It's always some form of managing that for certain ends. So even if we put in, let's say, carbon pricing or something like that, the time frames, if we buy even the most conservative science around it, we have no historical precedence for the markets moving fast enough to what we need to move to solve this problem. Doesn't mean they don't work. It's just we don't have the time. So it's not a viable solution for the situation we're in right now.
So it will take something beyond capitalism.
I would agree with part of what you said, that yes, it can move the needle, but I would challenge that. I think that the system that created climate change probably can't be the one that fixes it, insofar as in capitalism, and we touched on this earlier, we make things and innovate things without thinking 7 generations down the line. And even with like renewable energies, those precious materials that we need to make solar panels, things like that, need to be mined, need to go into communities that often haven't had our consent, things like that. And I don't think that system looks at enough of the variables to solve any kind of existential crisis that we face.
The question is, what is the alternative here? Like, what is the actual solutions that are being put in place that is an alternative to capitalism? Because so far I just see we have to get rid of fossil fuels by 2035 and then we'll save the world. And that doesn't seem like a feasible option to me.
The Green New Deal is a feasible option.
What is the solutions in the Green New Deal that are being laid out?
I mean, the Green New Deal is a incredible and huge, it's not a piece of legislation, it's a resolution. And it talks about how, there's so much in it. We can't have climate justice without racial justice. We can't have climate justice without taking care of people and making sure their basic needs are met so that they actually can look at these issues. It's going to be somewhat of a paradigm shift and a total societal shift of how we do things, because we can't save ourselves under capitalism and exploiting the people and the work that they do.
But my question is, beyond just symbolic language, how do we get from point A to point B?
You can start by decarbonize our economy very quickly. And basically, we want to electrify everything. Every time we're switching over a motor, a furnace, a vehicle, go to electrification. But the market forces of capitalism aren't going to drive that. It's going to be capitalism. Well, that capitalism as it is, you have to add regulation and certain restrictions that will drive it in a certain direction. So something like that, the free market is not going to get us to make that choice because we don't see it soon enough. But we can legislate for it. It doesn't eliminate capitalism. Capitalism just has to work with a few more constraints.
Why doesn't it work? Anytime I ask the question why on these things, I never get a straight answer beyond just like, well, unfettered capitalism isn't going to work. And there's no like actual justifications behind it usually.
Because the tree is worth more dead than it is alive.
Yeah, so we keep regrowing trees too.
Yeah, you keep cutting them down.
And then we
What about whales?
grow them back up.
We use things. Capitalism uses things.
I mean,
We
socialism
have a
uses things
finite
too.
amount of resources.
I don't think socialism is the answer either. To your point, you said why won't it work by itself? I think it's fundamentally human nature when set up in a scenario where we're going to take care of ourselves first, unless we can collectively make rules that override our day-to-day normal choices that are going to be more self-centered than communally centered. And so we have to build structures that support the communally centered thing, so that my preference, I'd like to drive 80 miles an hour most of the time, but there's a good thing, the threat of me getting a ticket is enough for me to drive slower.
But human nature doesn't change because people are sitting in bureaucratic agencies making decisions.
Can we qualify human nature? Just because human nature isn't Western capitalist nature. It's not Western white culture, I think, is what we're talking about, not human nature. Because not all cultures value the same things that we do.
Although I think as Darwin, white capitalistic culture, it's kind of survival of the fittest. I think people do look out for themselves before they can look out and care about the whales. But I guess what I am struggling with is this I don't believe in, kind of unfettered capitalism, and I don't think there's ever been unfettered capitalism anywhere, because there are certain needs of the society that matter more than that particular company raking in as much money as they can. And there's always been a balance. There's been more regulation and less regulation. And I think capitalism actually needs regulation to make sure we're covering broader needs of society. I don't think capitalism is inherently evil. It's just an economic system that allows people to exchange things of value. And where it's gotten off the rails is where there hasn't been enough regulation.
I think where it's gotten off the rails is where you have corporate entities making backroom deals with politicians. And that's not capitalism. That's people greedily making deals with politicians, which is the opposite of capitalism.
Rewriting the rules.
It's rewriting the rules. That's not fair. That's not a free market. That's people building up monopolies through fiat. That's not capitalism.
Which is why there's a set of laws out there that are designed to prevent monopolies. The fact that it hasn't been enforced or put into play recently has been to our detriment.
Is that a symptom of capitalism?
That's a symptom of government.
Well, aren't monopolies a symptom of capitalism? I mean,
Yeah.
That's where they ultimately end up, unless you have some structure that somehow redistributes it once someone becomes a monopoly.
I wouldn't say that.
Because they have pure pricing power if they're a monopoly. And so they can do whatever just to make more money.
So like I've worked in various regulatory policy reforms in the past. And what I always end up seeing is you see these guys coming in and lobbying so that they can do away with their competition and so that they can carve out their own little piece of a monopoly. That is not a free market. That is using government agents to carve out and to be able to make this larger profit and squeeze out everybody else. Is like this is just a crony. That's just a crony system. That's not freedom in any sort of capacity. Like the monopolies right now are mainly being formed by government fiat.
So
as far as I can see.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing that that's
Yeah.
happening, but I think any game of capitalism ultimately over time ends up in somebody having so much power that it becomes untenable unless unless you're the one with all the power.
I feel like there's just kind of like these weird value judgments being thrown around without any actual basis of what's actually happening in political policy.
Because it feels like you're kind of dismissing it at the same time. Like you're kind of dismissing like that this is what's happening right now, and that like you keep referring to your doctrine, but you're not looking at what's going on right now.
No, I'm explaining what's going on right now. Is you have
Okay.
people going to politicians to carve out their little monopolies.
But is that just
That's
what happens?
that's not unfettered capitalism. That's fettered capitalism.
No, that's unfettered capitalism with political power.
Yeah, but that's the exact opposite of a free market. That is things being taken through government coercion.
They're not taken by government coercion. They're taken by those companies who are trying to establish their monopolistic position.
Yeah, through government coercion.
That's a mechanism
That's one
that they're
tool.
using. That's a tool they're using.
But
they
government
shouldn't- they
coercion is
shouldn't be al-
absent. Like
they shouldn't be allowed
capitalism
to
is
use it.
absent government coercion.
Okay, let's table capitalism. So, Pete, you mentioned democracy might be too slow for the changes we need. Do we need a dictator?
I mean, there's a great line from I think Thomas Friedman's book. I don't remember which one. It was "The World Is Flat" or "Hot, Flat, and Crowded." But he's like, "We need to be China for a day," like, and by that it means like our democratic system is important, but we have to move quickly. And to your point, there's so many powerful lobbies, business that are going to stop our current democratic system from making a dramatic shift and really shifting the laws, because somebody's going to lose when anything. But if you've got a dictator for a day and says, all right, changing the rules of the game, it's going to be a big shift. We're doing it tomorrow. Everything starts here, but at least everybody's going, all right, we're now all playing the same game again. And now we're moving forward. But again, given the time crunch, we have to move that quickly. And it's one of the great things about our democracy is that it's designed to move slowly, and you have to build consensus, and you have to it's much more designed for people to be able to stop things from happening than to make things happen. And that's just its nature, which is great on one sense, but it really makes it difficult to move quickly. There's so much bureaucracy. There's so much institutional memory. The gears move very slowly. So yeah, I would say China for a day.
China for a day. Who's pro-dictator? No one?
No.
No,
Not even you, Sarah?
I'm good.
I'm pro Bernie.
I like that.
I'm pro get rid of the filibuster.
Get rid of the filibuster.
Ezra Klein wrote a great piece in Vox that it was like part of the reason it's moving so slowly right now is because of things like the filibuster, which you elect in a set of politicians and they can't actually make something happen in the Senate. And so then nothing really happens. Everybody just continues to stay frustrated and nothing happens. He was like, get rid of it. And if you elect in a bunch of Republicans, you know what? Some shit's going to happen. But you can vote again in 2 years.
Yeah.
And you vote in somebody else, let them actually make some changes and do some things. And if people don't like it, vote in someone else.
But we saw a problem with that in 2016 when Mitch McConnell just wouldn't hold a vote for the next Supreme Court seat. And like, it's a nice theory, but there's things in our government that are so complicated that we can't really predict them until they actually happen. So Mitch McConnell just pulled out this thing that's never been done before. He's like, well, it's not technically illegal. I can do it anyway.
I think getting rid of the filibuster would change more things like that than not doing it. I just think it makes everything move too slowly, and it makes the people not be as responsive.
Do we want things moving fast though? Like,
No.
when
Need it.
like, what if things are moving fast that you don't like?
Vote differently in 2 years.
Yeah, like, because it's just like all of us obviously have a wide range of policy positions on what we agree with. Is like, I don't want the things moving fast that I don't like.
Sure. Well,
I think we're all like
we have
that,
that
right?
preference, but I would also say that we have a system that was designed 200 some years ago. And if you just look at the pace of change, there's the exponential growth in globalization and climate change, in Moore's law, and all these things. And we have a system that's designed to move really, really slow when the world's only getting faster and faster and faster. So to me, it's going to be more and more and more of a mismatch, just to be able to respond to what's happening in the world.
Do you think that's why the president's had more power? Like in the past 80 years, the presidential position has gained a lot of power. And I mean, that's kind of why he was supposed to exist, was for those decisions that need to happen. Like right now, that's why the president was there, so he could sign executive orders or whatever. Now he has a lot more power than he used to, though. So I think that we might kind of very quietly have a kind of a dictator, or like have someone who can be a dictator if they wanted to, but they don't have to be.
I think the people want a dictator. Like
Really?
that's why everything's moving in towards more executive power, president by president.
But we want like a good guy dictator.
I mean, define good. Everybody has their own opinion.
Hold on, Kyle, who did you vote for in the 2016 election?
I voted for Harambe.
Harambe the gorilla. Why did you vote for Harambe?
Because I think of democracy as kind of a mythology. I don't really I think people just kind of put this religious lens on government and treat it as their god. And people go towards these like presidential candidates as their saviors of who's going to usher in the new second coming of whatever. I don't really see my vote as mattering that much for the actual presidency. I like various people on various things, but I'm kind of a radical in my own beliefs, and nobody's really speaking to me anyways.
What do you think of that, Sarah?
It hurts a little bit. I mean, everyone's entitled to the way they feel. But for me, that election and this one is society shifting. And just that there were people's lives who I love on the line for both elections. And so it doesn't sound like complacency necessarily, but that view on it, it's definitely not something I share.
If I would have voted for like a real candidate, not a dead gorilla, I would have voted for Gary Johnson because I am a libertarian. So I probably would have gone with the Libertarian Party option.
What was I'm curious, the impact that you hope to have? I'll put that in the frame of, I tend to be a pragmatist on it. So it's like, I'm never going to find a candidate that is going to represent me unless it's me, right? So let's
go Pete.
But with that vote, sometimes I could see where voting for Harambe is a strategic move based upon what you're trying to do.
Harambe is always a strategic move.
But if it's really just to sort of like, I don't like either of these people, it's sort of a protest, I don't like either of these people, that to me abdicates a little bit of the responsibility or the impact of what voting can do.
This is a little tense, but I also feel that voting satirically definitely showcases privilege and your lack of having rights on the line when voting for the next 4 years. And that's something that it shows to me, because there are like my own rights are on the line in this election, and I'm very aware of that. And there are a lot of people I know whose like safety in this country is also on the line. So that's another reason that I don't see that for myself.
It also doesn't okay, I voted satirically for the presidential election, but I also vote for my local candidates. I generally know my local representatives. I've been in the political game in Montana in the past. I know who these people are and I vote for them. But I also don't really believe that voting should change my rights. Just because a majority of people vote for something and they want to take my property via taxation or whatever, or they want me to put money towards this issue or that issue, is a majority should, just philosophically speaking, but a majority shouldn't be able to tell me what to do with my property and my well-being and be able to dictate what my life is.
So you'd rather have a dictator, one person telling you what to do with your life?
No, I'd rather have no one telling me what to do with my life and for me to voluntarily put my money where I want it to go.
Okay, so you just don't buy into the whole idea of a social contract. That like
I
you
don't
have
buy
to.
into a social contract
Why not?
for the reasons I just said. I don't care how noble your charity is. You have to convince me to donate to your charity.
Okay, there you go. So you just don't like the idea of blindly following along with the idea that like you have to give up certain social rights in order to have a happy society.
I don't think that's how societies stick together. Societies stick together because of cultural values and norms and people voluntarily making decisions with each other. Sure, bad things can happen every now and then. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be like law and stuff like that.
How is going to pay for it again?
Pay for what?
Law?
Law? It's
In
like,
your no taxation world?
we have private arbitration all the time. Private courts.
So
Oh, I know.
so-
I know private arbitration exists. It's just like they're not going to go out there and solve.
It's like
For
what we were
crime.
talking about with the capitalism argument before. If people want it, they will come. If you're providing something of value that people want, people will come for it.
And then the people with money get to decide how society works.
People do that right now in the status quo with our
True.
governmental
And I would
system.
argue that doesn't work now.
Yeah,
even.
I agree with you.
So,
That
that
doesn't work right
that
now.
doesn't work. Sarah talked about privilege. So is the status quo working for you right now enough to not vote for president or take it seriously?
I take it seriously. We're living in the largest power structure that's ever existed in the world right now, with the most funded military that's ever existed in the world right now. Like, I take it seriously. I wouldn't say that I don't take it seriously. Like, I pay attention a lot to everything that's going on. Like, I wouldn't say I don't take it seriously. I have a very moral view of it. Like, I don't believe, like, I believe what's going on right now in the world, a lot of these things are like morally incorrect. Like, and it's kind of a protest to that in some ways, I guess you could say.
Okay. If you had to make a choice right now about bringing a child into the world today, what would you decide and why?
It sucks, and there's a lot of scary things going on in the world right now, but there has never been a better time to be alive than right now. And I firmly believe that.
Completely agree.
There's a lot of wealth disparity, whatever, but it's like the point that you were saying earlier, and even to that, I got to say, like, it's got to be proportional, whatever, but 100 years ago, man, you could have just been walking around, doing your thing, living it up, and you're dead the next second. And there's nothing anybody could have done about that, not even yourself. Now we're all civilized and we're walking around and we just got to worry about like what kind of coffee we make in the morning.
Yikes, that is not all I worry about.
Sarah, you have a little bit of different view on that.
Well, I mean, I go in and out. I definitely think about the prospect of having children daily. And if I feel like it's ethically responsible going into a world where I'm not sure I'll be able to protect them or care for them with the current state of things and where it feels like we're going. And I don't have a ton of faith all the time, but sometimes I do. I mean, I don't know. I've never lived in any other time, but it's a rough time right now, at least for like looking forward and asking myself questions like, will I live to see old age? I don't know. And to that, like walking around and just kind of die. I mean, it wouldn't be like that, but there could be natural disasters that wipe people out just the same. And we're just having so many crises come to a head right now with economic, like disparity and racial disparity and the climate crisis. I just don't know. I want to. I've always wanted kids my whole life, but it's a tough one for me that I go back and forth on daily.
But has that guarantee of like, am I bringing my kids into a good world? Has that guarantee ever existed?
No, you're right. There's always been chaos and actually this kind of morbidly gives me some sort of peace knowing that people and humans, not all cultures, but lots of cultures in the past have always been really horrible to each other. Like it's not new that people are terrible to each other. And I do hope and think that there is a better world out there that hopefully can be created. But right now with so much division, a lot of the time I don't know.
Is there a value to accepting what is?
Life is full of risk, and life is filled with various forms of suffering everywhere. And people have been dealing with this since the dawn of humanity. Like, there's never been a guarantee that you're going to be able to provide your kid with a good life. Like, at one point in time, the biggest concern for parents was whether or not a cougar would break into the house and steal the kid away and eat it. Like, we don't have to deal with those things anymore, at least not in our country. Like, in some places in Africa, you
Speak
might
for
have
yourself.
to. Yeah, in some places, in some third world countries, you'd still have to deal with that type of a thing. But for the most part, across the world, child mortality rates are great. They've never been better. We got quality education across the world right now for kids to be able to learn all these cool things that humans have done across society for centuries, millennium.
I think we live in it's this paradox, right? Of the more we know, we feel the existential threats. We see, as we become more compassionate, our circle of care gets bigger. We see the pain in the world. We see the suffering. We're more sensitive sometimes to that suffering. But when I try to back my way into the question, like, what is it? What are the things that make life satisfying and, joyful to be alive? And, it can be a great dinner with friends. And, moments like that. And then it's like, oh, well, why do I care about saving humanity from climate change? Actually, it's so I can have a great dinner with friends. And I also think there's something just around our meaning-making structures. Like, it's not happiness in the class, like, that I'm always joyful all the time, but that life is meaningful, that there's relationship, that there's engaging things to do, interesting problems to solve. And if I start there and I go, okay, well, if that's what life is about, then bringing a child into this world, and that life inherently has that value, whether it's a short life or a long life, or it has that capacity, I'm for it. And I think that other thing around being a parent is one of the hardest things, and it's grown me more than any other type of experience in my life. It's its own kind of challenge and thing. It's not, but certainly not happiness and joy, but there's a lot of meaning and challenge in it that I find valuable.
I would have to say I'm with Pete on that. My two, whatever they were, millennials, both tend to talk about how they're really concerned about ever having kids. It kind of breaks my heart. I try and not have too much of a discussion because it's like, let's wait and see. They're pretty young. And it's like, I've learned so much from them. And it's like, my hope would be that, you and you would all want to. I love when you talk about, like, ethically, you're probably not, none of you guys are going to have like 5 kids like in my family. But because I think that contributes to kind of the problem, but I would all hope you would.
Shane, are previous generations leaving a better world than when they found it?
I have no idea. I really don't know. At this point, it's really hard to tell, isn't it?
What do your instincts tell you right now?
Yes. My instincts tell me yes, but the more I think about it, there's just so many unhappy people in the world right now. A lot of people are very unhappy, and despite it's factually or objectively better, it doesn't really matter because people just aren't happy.
I think it depends on what you're looking at, I guess, because in most areas of society, I do feel like there's been advancement, and I am extremely hopeful that all of the turmoil that we're in right now is going to lead to a much better place than we've been in ever as like humanity. And in that way, yes, but like with the climate crisis, then there's another sort of lack of forethought that happened quite a while ago and continues to happen today. So I think yes and no at the same time. But I think that's kind of the way it goes, I think, with any generation. But I think it may actually have more to do with like society and the way that's been crafted by relatively few people to work the way it does than necessarily generations in themselves. And that's, again, like taking blame off of the individual necessarily and putting it more on the societal function.
I tend to see us as part of an evolutionary process. So I think the arc is, going in the right direction. I think where we compare to, what we compare to can look, worse. And 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 I don't know if part of that, as part of that evolutionary process, is if we as humans take ourselves out in this, in a deep time sense, and then something else comes along. But the other thing, I love the quote by I think it's Ken Wilber, who says, evolution is beautiful, but it's not pretty. And there's a lot of messiness to this thing that we're participating in. It goes back to probably where you started, which is I don't know. I don't really know, but my sense is that we're on a better trend. But if I pan back far enough, if I look at it just through the human lens or human perspective, I don't know if it'll look like it's better. But if you pan back to a slightly more cosmological perspective, it might be exactly what we need.
And just to tie it a little bit back to the kind of the okay boomer phrase, so long as we learn from the past, I don't actually care about the past. And it's like it's all about what are we doing next. And I mean, philosophically, I'm a big one for I want better. There's part of me that's like I don't spend a lot of time, be honest, on the Green New Deal because I don't think that's in our near-term future, that it's just going to happen. And so I want better, 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 and better, and better. And, maybe it gets there sooner rather than later. And you need people pushing for all kinds of different things. But I'm kind of a Pollyanna and hope for the best. I think there are good political servants out there. Political service is a worthwhile job. It's not some crap job. Long topic, short.
I was just going to recommend 2 books to listeners. Matt Ridley is an excellent author, and he has 2 books on this topic called The Rational Optimist and The Evolution of Everything. And its general thesis is working through just the story of humanity and how we've advanced ourselves like generation by generation for thousands of years, and how we have, despite all the alarmism, despite all the fear that is just pervasive throughout society, and it's always pervasive throughout society. There's always fear mongering going on everywhere. We've overcome and we've gotten better. And that's just a general sense that I feel throughout all this is as we continue to evolve, sure, there's going to be problems. We're going to have some bad evolutionary times or whatever, but we've made it through this far. I have no reason to not believe that we're not going to keep making it through right now.
If you're on the younger side, I want to know what advice you have for older generations. And if you're on the older side, I want to know what advice you have for younger generations.
I'm the boomer, so I guess I'm giving old advice. I think life is better when you're a little more optimistic than pessimistic. Just in terms of the outlook, the caring for other people, the ability to then keep pushing forward and moving forward. And I don't know if that's something people are born with or not, but I think people are happier and more fulfilled and everything if they just, it's like, don't believe the worst in everything. I mean, every capitalist is not evil. Some definitely are. And that better is possible.
I think generally advice to older people, I guess, would be keep giving us advice, keep giving the younger generation advice, but also in turn recognize that we might have problems that are existing within our generations that are different from the problems that you guys had to overcome. Still continue giving our advice because I think there's a lot of value in people that have longer lived experiences than the rest of us. There's also that disconnect sometimes is like just when it comes to things like technology, the economy is a completely different animal than it used to be back in the day. We have kind of different struggles when it comes to jobs and education and just general trying to find meaning in life.
I think I'm old. I think I'm on the old side. Pursue education. There's always more to learn. If there's anything I've discovered is just how little I do know and how much interesting things there are. And that changes my perspective. Don't get invested in a perspective or a way of making sense of it all, because my experience is that's even when I finally find a sort of meta theory that I think makes sense of everything, then it falls apart. And that's both exciting and frustrating. Follow the things that you find joy in. There's so many ways to bring joy to other people and serve other people. And I think getting outside of ourselves and connecting with other people and being in relationship is probably, for me, that's where the meaning comes when I can't find it in a big philosophical place. It does come in my relationship with a dog, my relationship with a friend, someone helping me, helping somebody else, again, having a good meal. Like those small things, I think, are microcosms of the whole thing and what makes it worth it. And so pursue those. And I think as long as we're taking in, our circle of care keeps getting bigger, then we can't help but address these larger things in thoughtful ways and struggle, and whether you come down on the side of capitalism is the way to do it. Like now we're just arguing about the best way, not let's find the values that we actually find in common, and actually stop looking at these focuses on identities. Like it's a problem with the boomer conversation or any generous, like, oh, here's one more way to divide me, an us and a them, which just to me doesn't help. So look for the ways that we're the same in this particular time where we're so focused on differences.
I guess I was just sort of sitting here thinking about like what I could come up with. I guess that it's just what P was saying about ways. Like we're all looking, whether it's capitalism or not, whether it's just human nature, we're all looking for the best way to do things. And I think that's kind of what got us here, is that we never stopped and were really infantile. Like we were never like stupid little babies. There's always just this little thing that like we have a goal and we have to get to it and we have to do a thing. There has to be something accomplished here. And I think that what the older generation can do is kind of teach us that a little bit. I think the older generation knows how to be infantile a little bit, a lot more than millennials or Gen X, like especially Gen X or millennials or me. I think they can teach us how to do that. Also, there shouldn't be any more 70-year-old presidents. So if you're 70 years old, don't run for president.
I'd say don't count us out because of our age, that we're engaged and kind of fired up. So buckle up, because we're coming.
I'm counting on it.
I like it.
Good. Unprecedented change is on the horizon. On that, we can all agree. What do the next 50 years hold? The possibilities seem endless. And as with the technological boom, perhaps unseeable until they are upon us, the youth are engaged and understandably angry. Younger generations have typically been the most willing to take risks, to dream the impossible, to take on the machine, to step away from the status. What if those ideologies were armed with unmitigated financial assets necessary to fund action? Well then, innovation rules. Society evolves, problems find solutions, growth happens. That is the hope, in any case. And amidst the mixed bag of politics, finances, experiences, convictions, genders, and yes, ages, it is a shared one, at least for now. Our panelists in this episode were Shane Lieber, Sarah Blessing, Susan Karstensen, Kyle Mack, and Pete Strom. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tate Chamberlain here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.